Welcome everyone to the VLOGAN, a vlog for individuals with special needs and those who love them. Today I am so happy to have Hannah Magrum with me. Hannah is a financial professional with Cornerstone Advisors through Thrivent, but she also is a consultant helping families in the special needs community make sure that they get the benefits that they need. And she does that in Ohio and really all over the country. So I'm excited to talk with her and learn about her business called HK Magrum Consulting. So Hannah, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
If we could just start talking a little bit about how you got into, well, not only financial planning, but also the benefits side and helping people with disabilities and their families get benefits.
I've been an advisor for 12 years. I am a mom, a wife, and at the beginning of my career, we had one child. And then early on in my career, we had Corbin. And Corbin, we didn't know all his medical complexities until he was born. So even though I had been an advisor for a few years, I was kind of thrown into this world that I was not expecting to be thrown into. And in those early years, I can remember social workers or physicians giving us like 3 typed pages of like, here's potential resources and benefits, and feeling very lost, particularly when you're in the thick of it. You're balancing a really busy schedule of potentially therapies and doctor's appointments and surgeries and everything else. And so it felt very overwhelming then to go and contact all these different services and support and spend the mental energy that was limited at that time in trying to go, is this something that could help? Is this not something that could help? And so it was a really frustrating system to sort of navigate through, not just from a public services support standpoint, but also insurance and, all that stuff. And then flash forward a few years, and during my last pregnancy with our youngest, Adeline, I went from running. So I was never a quick runner. I was average at best, but I'd run 3 to 5 miles a night, and I played open co-ed soccer, so, really pretty physically active. And then during that pregnancy, all of a sudden my body went haywire. It all started in this hand that these 2 fingers would droop. And we had thought, maybe weird carpal tunnel pregnancy type stuff, but it kept sort of spreading. And so I went and saw a neurologist. I had EMG and ECV testing. So that's like where they put electrodes in your skin, and they kind of send an electrical current and see how your nerves respond to that. And so I was diagnosed with a working diagnosis called Charcot-Marie tooth, that was, they believe, triggered by my pregnancy. So I always had it, but the stress of the pregnancy really made those symptoms sort of progress faster.
What's it called?
Charcot-Marie tooth. So it's named after the 3 doctors who found the disease. This is going to sound really weird. So it is considered rare, but it is the most common inherited peripheral neuropathy that's out there. So it's sort of a weird sort of
Yeah,
opposite
I
ends of the
understand.
spectrum. And so I now am a full-time wheelchair user myself. I have a service dog. And so I really shifted my practice because with Corbin, I learned so much with Corbin. And I didn't have really anyone that could help me or teach me. So I am a researcher by nature. And I remember reading like Ohio revised codes and, reading rules on health insurance and, what was possible, what wasn't possible, and really having to drive that education myself to figure out how to get all these pieces in place. And so I thought there's really got to be a better way to do this. And So then I really shifted the focus of my practice as a financial advisor to serving families and individuals in this space.
So let
And
me make sure that I got this. So you're a you graduate college, you become a
yep,
financial advisor, and then you have Corbin. And what year is that?
so Corbin was born in 2016.
Okay. So 2016, Corbin's born. He has medical challenges, and you begin to see that he is a child who has special needs. You start seeing things, what it's like for a parent of a child, what's out there for him.
Yeah,
And then how much later then did you get diagnosed with the Charcot-Marie tooth?
2016 is when I was diagnosed. That was the year that my daughter was born.
Got it. So 2014, Corbin's born. You have a child who has medical challenges and a special needs child. You are thrust into that world. You're planning as a parent of a child with special needs, and then in 2016, you yourself become an individual with special needs and a disability,
Yeah,
and you now are dealing with both of those areas of work. And so you decide, hey, I'm learning it. I'm going to also then take this information and help my clients. And so you narrow your practice down, focus your practice on
yep,
families with individuals with special needs and individuals with special needs.
right, yep. So
Awesome.
at the time when I really decided to do that, the stats at that time was there was something like over 300,000 financial advisors in the country at that time. And less than 500 actually work in this area and specialize. And when you look at, approximately a quarter of the population has a disability, 500 people can't serve that quantity of individuals who really deserve specialized planning in very complex areas.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you don't know all those rules, mistakes can happen, and those mistakes can be a really, really big deal. And so my consulting business was really born out of the fact that not everybody needs a financial advisor. There's a ton of stuff I could do that people aren't even traditionally aware of financial advisors doing. Part of my education as a chartered special needs consultant, the first whole class I took was really on special education. That's not something typical to a financial advisor. I have additional training in that area, but I had families who maybe had a very narrow focus on not being able to get waiver benefits or maybe getting a denial for a service through waiver. Under Appendix K, the states being allowed to have some changes within their waiver that in Ohio, for example, allowed a parent of a minor child to potentially be a compensated caregiver, through the waiver system. So sometimes I would come across families who just had that very narrow need of, can you help me, with the extraordinary care assessment tool? I'm being denied waiver services for my child or whatever that might be. So several years ago, that's when I created HK Magrum Consulting to be able to also serve those families who maybe didn't need the full breadth and scope of everything I can do and really needed a more narrow focus on, support in those areas. And I've actually even been hired by professionals, attorneys or things of that nature to help serve the families in that space.
So can you walk us through what that looks like in the consulting business? You mentioned a few things, the Ohio Extraordinary Care Instrument, waiver stuff, that kind of thing. Can you walk through kind of some typical cases that you might have worked on where you've been helpful to people in maybe getting a waiver, getting a service under a waiver, those kinds of things?
Yeah. So I've got several, and I think part of the frustrating thing that individuals experience is certain counties might be easier to access some of those benefits versus other counties. Families can get really confused when their county is saying one thing, and then maybe a friend's county says something else. And so, for example, there's a county that just categorically does not like to put minor kids on waiver. There's no rule that prohibits a minor child being on waiver. And so this particular county, for this case, had sent an email and said, they don't qualify for waiver because they are receiving John Peterson scholarship. And I said, it doesn't matter. Those two things can exist together. There's no rule that says that, if you're getting proper support through the public school system, that you can't also access waiver. They do different things. They are meant to do different things. And so it was really working with that family to then show that, that their assumptions through this other county were incorrect. And so subsequently we were able to get waiver placement. My own child was the first in our county to go through the ECA assessment tool. I've helped families through the Medicaid appeal process at the state level, where there are certain things through waiver that if you ask for them, it's going to likely trigger a higher level of oversight. So that's things like generators, fences, some things like that are going to trigger that oversight. So then helping families navigate the appeal process, which can feel intimidating, but it's not once they understand, interestingly enough, how it can somewhat mimic an IEP system that they might be more familiar with.
Got it.
Um,
Can you walk us through and me through that case where you had a county that was saying, hey, we got John Peterson, you don't need a waiver, they're a minor child. What did that look like? Was that you talking to the support administrator? Was that you going up the ladder? How did that end up coming about that the child was on a waiver? How far did you have to go up in the kind of chain of review?
it was actually only one discussion. Uh, so that was sort of the really interesting thing about that was, and I always tell families to get everything in writing
Mm-hmm.
and make sure, just like if you're in the IEP process and you're told no for a service or something like that in the IEP process, you want to know why they're saying no and you want it documented. So as soon as this county provided the documentation and it was via email saying, your child does not qualify because they're on a John Peterson scholarship, and they can't receive both, you can only have one waiver at a time. All it took was a professional but yet strongly worded email to say that's not the rule. Here are the rules, and nowhere in these rules does it state that someone can't receive proper public education in addition to receiving waiver. That's a conflict to say that you're able to have one civil right but not the other. So really it was, interestingly enough, like I said, a strongly worded email that they then said, okay, yep, and did go through all the, in that case, the child had already gone through, I believe they were under the age of 16, so they would have done the CODI. So they had already determined that they were eligible, but just determining that you're eligible doesn't necessarily get you placement. So
Well,
then you were
and using the incorrect term that the John Peterson Scholarship is a waiver,
right. I
right?
was like, it's not a waiver. Like,
Yeah, right, right.
it's a scholarship.
And what I have found in the little that I do in this area is that many times it's not someone who's trying to keep an individual from getting, there's just so many rules and
Yeah.
changes that no person boots on the ground who is, trying to help a caseload of people can actually know every rule and know every term. I do this on a daily basis. I work with families to prepare estate planning, trusts, powers of attorney, guardianship, supported decision making, and you use the extraordinary care instrument. And I'd never heard that term before. And I knew, so for many of my families, the parents become a paid provider after 18. I had never heard the term that the extraordinary care can actually get an individual paid, a parent paid before the child turns 18. So never knew that. My experience is, hey, if you become the guardian, you have to get probate court permission to do that. That's my area there, not this extraordinary care instrument. So fabulous. I just learned something. So it's great.
Well, and even to expand on it, so it used to be like, so if you happen to have someone who's older, who's married, it used to be that the spouse could not be a compensated caregiver. The extraordinary care assessment also allows a spouse, if they meet all the requirements, to be a compensated caregiver through the waiver system. There are other rules beyond that, like they have to be basically the provider of last resort. There can't be any other willing and able providers. Um, but what's interesting, I find often these rules are written in a way that there's some gray to them. And so an example that I give, and I only share stuff about Corbin, my son's information that he's comfortable with me sharing. But so for example, I went to a state level appeal for a whole house generator for Corbin. And I'm really good at actually doing appeals now for a whole home generator because I've learned sort of the magic combination of things that you need to do. Um, but for example, so we did go through it, it was approved, but I can remember they then said, okay, the generator's approved, but it is over the $10,000 limit because of the gas line and the wiring, so you need to pay for those out of pocket. We do not have to pay for those. So I pulled the rule that said, it says something like plumbing and wiring that's necessary for the functioning of something that they're installing needs to also be covered. And what's interesting about that is it wasn't necessarily the local board who had initially said no. They had asked someone at the state level, like, can we pay for the wiring and the gas line? And someone at the state level said, no. And so when I pulled the rule and I emailed the rule, and it's very clearly listed in there that they could do it, they then went back to the state and someone else at the state level said, oh yeah, you guys should be paying for that.
Wow. So getting there, so like what can you kind of walk us through the process of, okay, hey, you go into your ISP meeting and you ask for a generator and they say no, right? What happens then?
Yeah, so they're going to send you just like, so I tell families, so it's going to feel like the IEP process. And sometimes I start there because that tends to be a system that families are more familiar with. And so what you'll get after that is you will get in the mail, you'll get a reason for denial. They're going to state whatever state statutes back their reason for denial. And then on this letter, it's also going to state your options for appeal. And so you then can fill out that you want to move to a state level appeal, or there are lower levels that you can attempt, like a county conference. And then you're going to send that back in. And then what's going to happen is there's a website, you'll create basically a profile that's going to link in your appeal case into it. Your county board then needs to create what's called an appeal document. So it's going to list the reason they said no and why. So in this case, for Corbin initially, they pulled the code. I don't remember all of them, but I know that they pulled the one stating, it needs to be the least expensive option that will fulfill the requirement. That's a Medicaid rule. And so they made the statement that a portable generator is less expensive and could meet his needs. And so as soon as you know the reason they're saying no, you know the why, you then can start to build your case to prove why either those assumptions, those statements are not accurate. And in Corbin's case, that was having his physician write all the electrical systems that are necessary for his health and safety. So that's, central air and refrigerator and stuff like that. And then I had a qualified electrician state that there's no way a portable generator could meet those needs.
And this the reason why that he wasn't provided is going to be found where in that denial letter?
It's so in that denial letter, yes, they're going to send you the revised codes that they are using to support their denial. And then after you file your appeal, if you decide to appeal, they then need to create really what's called an appeal document that dives deeper than what that initial appeal letter is. And when I first did this with Corbin, I didn't know that they had to generate that document and they're supposed to provide it to you. So I actually got kind of lucky. I called the state level appeal. It was done just over telephone with a hearing officer. And so the hearing officer, the local board ended up not being able to make it. And the hearing officer, he really helped me a lot. He said, "Did they send you the appeal document ahead of time?" And I said, "No, what is this?" And he's like, "Well, they are required to send that to you. So it's good that we're going to need to reschedule. You need to get that appeal document." So then I was able to get that appeal document, build my case, and then submit all my supporting paperwork and information for my case directly through the portal.
Wow. Wow. So have you mentioned that on a denial you have you have your a kind of a county appeal, which is a group, and then you have the state appeal. Do you do both? And meaning, is there a tactical reason that in some cases you would go state versus county, or how does that work? Or do you always say we're going to go state?
I think it's really dependent on your county and the reason for denial. So, my county in this case, their main reason for denial was they felt that it was not the least expensive option that would meet Corbin's needs. And so I didn't feel like I was going to get anywhere with the county. And I immediately, and I also know there's more county oversight at the state level now, particularly on larger purchases or things like that, where sometimes there's a feeling that a county is going to want to push it to state level appeal because that kind of takes a little bit of liability off of them, that the fear of them getting audited in a few years and the state disagreeing with the generator, that they approved, and there being a financial, consequence to them. Whereas if you're approved at the state level, that in some ways sort of takes that pressure off the county, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
state has determined it was necessary. And so I think that, and this is an assumption I'm making, which can be dangerous, but I think that in some cases like that, it's easier just to go to the state because the county might just have some hesitancy to say yes on something like that.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. So HK Magrum, when did it start? How do people find out about you? And are you terribly busy?
So I am like my own worst enemy. I do zero advertising. It's all been referrals, words of mouth, people being sent to me. Anyone could email me just through hkmagrum@gmail.com. I am busy, but I always have capacity. I will always find time. It feels like such an important thing to so many families. And I can remember every time I was able to be successful for Corbin, the sense of relief that I would have that he would get something that he needed, or, things might be a little bit easier for him. That in my opinion, I would never be too busy to try to help somebody.
Amazing. So, you're in Medina, is that right?
Yep.
And so do people need to come and see you, or is most of your work done via Zoom meetings and emails?
Yeah, so most of my work is done via Zoom. I actually work with clients in, I think I'm at 19 or 20 states right now. So I work with clients
Wow.
really throughout the country.
Wow. And so you then get familiar with the different laws there.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So like I work quite a bit in like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Colorado and lots of different states throughout the country. So what's also really interesting is I don't know why people don't always want to retire in Ohio. Something about our weather, I guess. And so I'll have clients who will say, what other states are benefit friendly? Or how do we go from Ohio? Maybe they're moving for a job or something like that. What's that process of leaving Ohio to go to another state? Because that can feel really overwhelming if you're potentially leaving a care team, if you're leaving, services that are already in place and needing to transition, knowing what that might look like. And also, talking to clients about what are, good states that are out there for benefits and what are other states that might be a lovely state if you don't have a disability, but if you have a disability, chances are you're not going to get state level benefits within a timely manner.
So you actually do some consulting with people who say, hey, we're planning to move to, let's just make something up, North Dakota. Can you help us make a soft landing there?
Yeah, yeah. So we've helped families like know the steps that they should take before going to a new state. I'm not licensed in North Dakota, so I'm not so familiar with their benefits. But
What
yeah,
license do you have that makes you familiar with benefits other than being a mom and an individual yourself with a disability?
yeah. So it's funny. My business partners often like, how do you get all this stuff in your brain? And I'm like, I have no idea. It just exists in my brain. So it's really once you really understand very, very well the deep research necessary to really understand one state's benefits, you can transcribe that to other states to really understand. That you want to see what is their Title V, what does their TEFRA Medicaid look like if they have it. We know that we're dealing in a waiver system. Ohio, we have the JFS waiver system, we have the DODD waiver system. How are other states implementing this? And really understanding what that looks like in each state. And so it's just something over the years that we kind of have a methodical process for when we're doing a deep dive and picking up a new state.
Now, but you mentioned that you're not certified in other states. So what does that mean? Do you have a certification here in Ohio?
On the financial advising side, I can apply for different states and pick up different states, and they have different requirements
What?
before I
To
start
be an
working.
advisor,
What's that?
to be a financial advisor.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so what, okay, so let me make sure that I understand. So as a financial advisor do you have the chartered special needs
Consultant
consultant
designation. Yep.
designation?
And a certification in long-term care.
And that that is, and those are the letters after your name on the screen. So
Yep,
that's a national thing. But
yep,
but as an advisor, you are licensed in Ohio to provide financial advice. And
yep.
because of your work in the financial realm and working with families, most of your knowledge is here in Ohio. But because you know how to look for things and that there is some overlap and that Medicaid in Ohio is not the same as Medicaid in South Carolina because they have TEFRA, but it's similar enough that you know where to look and get the information.
Right,
Got it. Awesome.
right.
Do you help people just at appeal? Is that where most of the time people are coming to you with benefit issues through the county board or Medicaid at a denial first? And then if that's a yes, do you ever consult with people before they go into an ISP meeting or before they do that OEDI, COEDI, or the waiver wait list instrument? Do you do any consulting beforehand to prepare them for that?
I would say actually the bulk of the consulting work is getting waiver placement, working through the ECA. That really is the bulk, the day-to-day. And appeals happen less frequently, but we certainly do them. What seems to happen most often is going through the CODI, going through the OD or the OAI, CIN, or the ECA, like all these abbreviations that
Yeah,
people
so
don't
let's
understand.
let's break those down. So you
Yeah,
said ECA instrument.
that's the extraordinary care assessment.
Okay, so that's for parent or spouse being paid as a provider
Correct.
of a minor, a parent of a minor child. So that's ECA. OEDI is the eligibility for
Over
services through a county
16.
board, correct?
Yep, for over 16.
Over 16. Co-EDI is the kid one.
Under 16. The OD has one additional category that they look at, whereas the OD is, oh, I'm sorry, the CODI for children has 6 that they look at. The
Got it.
CODI has 7.
So I say co-EDI, you're saying Cody, so that's to determine whether they're eligible for county board services. Okay.
Right.
And then there is the waiver instrument that they still call a waiver waitlist instrument, even though they don't have a wait list. And
Yeah, so that's the officially the OAI CIN, but basically says, is your need immediate? Is it future? Is it urgent?
right. And I think the terms that they use are emergent, current, and then no need, right? Is that
Or future.
okay?
So
Future.
there's a need, but so like there are some counties, like I said, that they kind of categorically will put minor children on a future need, saying, oh, well, school's doing everything that school should be doing, and they're a minor, so parents should be doing everything else.
As a natural support.
Right. And so in a case like that, I might have a family saying, we're drowning. We cannot get any help. We need help. And so in a family like that, it might be approaching that assessment tool to really prove that they do need placement and that local funding is not adequate. And what's interesting is local funding is not the same across all counties.
Yeah.
And what someone can get in one county versus another county, I sometimes will see counties put really big dollars for an individual through local funding. I know an individual, for example, that gets 24-hour support services through local funding, and they're not on a waiver, and I have not seen that in any other county.
No.
Um,
Wow.
but
Wow.
then there are some counties that it's much more limited. You might get a few tools, through local funding, but it might feel more restrictive.
Yeah. So you mentioned this you talked about, we mentioned very briefly natural support. So I have a number of conversations with individuals who are not on the waiver and they wonder why they're not. And one of the things that I say is that you are and they're older parents, and I say, well, you're too natural of a natural support. You know, you probably go into these meetings and say everything's fine, you know, but it's probably not. And I say moms are generally the people who are keeping their children's head above water, and
Yeah,
to other people outside, it might actually look like the child's not only treading water, might actually be swimming, but mom is underneath the water, and
yeah,
it gets harder for her to come up for air. And people need to know that, you know, you're never going to be bad enough that they're going to ever remove your child from you and take them away, right? Where you're not
yeah,
abusing your child, you're just saying, I can't do it anymore. I
yeah,
need help. And you know, helping people to ask for that is something that I know that you do, and it's something that I try to do in my practice in
yeah.
the estate planning realm. So.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely true. And a good example of that is we had a family who very obviously this adult, young adult should qualify for waiver placement. And they just weren't quite sure. Like she had already gone through the OD and was approved and was supposed to be getting local funding, but it was pretty nominal. And so when I started to talk to the family about all the sort of support that needed to happen and all the things, it was pretty evident that this young adult should qualify for waiver. So the parent made this, it was several pages of all the things that she does for their child. And so when they did the wait list assessment and the parent provided these several pages of here's all the things I'm doing every day. I said, well, that's why you didn't get approved, because in their mind they're going, oh, well, you're doing it, so you're fine. This isn't what, your child doesn't need it because they've got you. When really it was a reframing that it needs to be what your child needs, not what you're doing for your child.
Mhm.
And so we reframed that language and their approach to it, and now they did receive placement.
Oh,
And that was
amazing.
within, I'd say, about 2 months.
Amazing. I think that that is a great place to wrap up our conversation today.
Yeah.
That's just fabulous. So thank you, Hannah, for coming and talking with me and to the viewers and listeners. What amazing work that you do, both as a financial professional, but as a consultant helping families get what they need in the disability world. So thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of VLOGAN. Please like, share, and subscribe so you can stay up to date with some of the latest news in the disability community.